My name's Lilith, and I'm 17 years old. Before you start, yes, I know my name's kind of strange, but it's not like I picked it, so I just go with it. My folks are the quirky kind, always caught up in some kind of drama or arguing with each other. Meanwhile, I hide out in my room, usually keeping the lights off, but I can't ever manage to fall asleep all the way through the night. I live in a perfectly average house. It's got 2 stories, 3 bedrooms, though one's more of an office, 2 bathrooms, though one's just a half bath, and a basement that's slowly turning into a moldy mess with the nastiest gray carpet you could imagine. I go to school every weekday, except for Saturdays and Sundays, of course. The bus always takes the same route, which gets old real quick. I wake up at exactly 7 every morning, never earlier, never later, mainly so I can avoid the annoyed grumbling from my parents. But honestly, there's something oddly comforting about the routine. The bus route's pretty predictable. It starts near my house at a school, then takes about 20 minutes to get to mine. Most of the time, it sticks to the same path, avoiding the pool or the gross, drooling homeless guy who hangs out on 9 Mile Road. Instead, we pass fast food joints, Kroger stores, and those little Middle Eastern markets. I remember my grandpa once telling me that every time you pass a cemetery, you're supposed to hold your breath, or the ghost will try to steal your body and use it to float around in some weird, misty afterlife. My favorite part of the ride is passing that cemetery. It's got these tangled green holly bushes, flowers that look like they've seen better days, gravestones cracked black with age, and this thick gray fence that almost dares you to stay out. Living in Detroit has this unique vibe you won't find anywhere else. Sure, we all complain about it, but deep down, none of us would want to live anywhere else. I remember being in the swim team locker room, and someone's cap goes missing. It's pretty much a given that everyone will groan, can't have shit in Detroit. We all share this moment of mutual frustration that somehow blends into this strange sense of belonging, like a mix of anger and home. I'm not one to go on about school, so I won't bother with that. What I will tell you about is the bus ride home. A cemetery looks completely different in the afternoon. The fog and dew-covered grass fade away, leaving behind this bright, almost lime-green grass and little twigs poking up from the ground. Even though it's a totally different scene, I'm not sure which one I like more. Sometimes I find myself daydreaming that there's some tiny creature or mischievous spirit just lurking around, or maybe a ghost floating with its misty, pale skin. I know it's strange to say that my favorite part of the day is driving past a cemetery. Call me weird or whatever, but I really don't mind. We all have those little things that make us happy, so why not enjoy the fact that I have one? Eventually, I find myself at swim practice, and there's something oddly comforting about the routine of it. Every day after school, for 3 hours, it's just the same. Sometimes I stick around and work, but more often than not, I just head home. When I do get home, it's the same drill. A few hours spent on homework, a little time for studying, and then sleep until the next morning. And you know the rest. Wake up at exactly 7, no more, no less, and the cycle repeats. My friends are always asking what kind of music I listen to, so I just tell them whatever's popular at the moment. They want to hear about some rapper they know, so I go with that. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind rap. I listen to it sometimes, but it's definitely not my go-to. It's just easier than saying I'm in a bands like Neutral Milk Hotel or Fountains of Wayne. If I drop those names, they'll look at me blankly and ask, "Who's that?" And I'll just shrug and say, "Oh, just some folk band," or "They're a power pop group." Then they'll chuckle awkwardly and move on to something else. If I get a free moment, I'll play games with my friends online. But most of the time, it's just me sitting there staring at my screen. I don't even know what I'm looking for, but I'm convinced that one day I'll stumble upon something that clicks. And when that happens, nothing's going to stop me. I also love to cook, and I'm pretty good at it. In fact, I'm probably one of the best 17-year-old cooks out there. At least in the US, call it confidence or cockiness, whatever you want. But if you're a 17-year-old cook, I can confidently say I'm better than you. Deal with it. I also play way too many instruments. Honestly, I don't even know how I make time for all of them, but somehow I manage. First chair trumpet, a solid double bass player, and a guitar player who could use a lot of work. But does any of that really matter? You can know all these little details about me, but it doesn't mean you know who I am. The truth is, if you met me in person, you probably wouldn't like me. Sure, some of my friends do, but that's their business, not yours. You don't know me, and I want you to remember that. To be honest, I probably wouldn't like you either. There are very few people I actually like, even among my friends. Hell, even in my own family. I'm not religious, but I do believe in ghosts. And I guess that's kind of ironic, isn't it? And I can already hear you asking, so what exactly are ghosts then? And all I can do is shrug. Honestly, my shoulders are starting to hurt from all the shrugging I've been doing. I'm running out of it is what it is moments, so I'll probably need to come up with something new soon. Most of my family is religious in some way, but I call them melancholic because that's really the only word that fits. None of us are really okay, and we've all come to terms with that. I'm telling you this because I think it's important, whoever you are, to remember me. When we die, all we have left is our legacy. If no one remembers us, we die in more ways than one. And, as I've already said, I don't believe in an afterlife. Anyway, sorry for the sudden shift in tone. When I said our house was perfectly normal, that wasn't exactly true. There's one thing about it that stands out, and I've never seen it in any other house. The stairs leading to our basement are completely out of place. They're a spiral staircase, made of dark-stained oak, and they connect to the kitchen. The grain of the wood swirls in smooth black streaks, like the marks left by car tires on a wet road. The varnish sometimes peels off a bit, leaving behind a sticky substance that, for some reason, is oddly satisfying to scratch at. The steps themselves are bare wood, looking like they were carved from a single block. Cat hair gets stuck in the cracks, and sometimes you'll find a piece of dog food at the bottom that crunches underfoot as you carefully make your way down. Today is December 5th, a Thursday. I just got home from swim practice, and honestly, I'm not okay. To be honest, I haven't been for a while now. I've been hallucinating, but not in the way you'd expect. It's much worse than that. It started exactly 2 weeks ago. It was a morning, and I was on the bus to school. As usual, we passed the cemetery, and as usual, I had music playing while I stared out at the silent gravestones. The mist hung low over the ground, rolling gently like clouds drifting across the graves. The earth seemed almost alive, moving slightly with each gust of wind. The grass stood tall, unmoving, yet still appeared to sway in the breeze, with a few stray blades poking up that the groundskeeper had missed. We were almost past the cemetery when I saw her. She was a pale woman, almost as pale as the mist swirling around her. Her skin had this eerie glow, catching the first rays of sunlight creeping over the horizon. Her eyes were wide, almost frantic, but she was frozen in place. Her hair didn't move with the wind at all, lying still, long and black, but matted with dirt, twigs, and bits of random debris. It looked fragile, like it could be pulled out with a gentle tug. She was incredibly thin. You could see her bones sticking out from under her translucent dress, and her skin looked unnaturally smooth, almost polished, like someone had rubbed it with sandpaper. She stood there, staring down at a grave, her head slightly tilted. Just as we were about to pass, her head jerked up, and she locked eyes with me. Her face looked empty, like there was nothing behind her eyes. Her mouth opened wide, revealing a pitch-black abyss, so deep it seemed endless. And then, just as we were almost past, she screamed. It wasn't a normal scream. It was so high-pitched it felt like it was cutting through my skull. Her voice cracked, and all I could make out were 2 words, "Find me. Please." And then the bus moved on. I looked around, panicked, but no one else was even paying attention. They were all glued to their phones or buried in homework they hadn't finished. The rest of the school day dragged on forever. I told my parents I had a school event lie. After school, I walked the mile to the cemetery. The black gates that seemed so imposing and foreboding were wide open. Their sharp spikes looked even taller as I stared at them. The sky, which had started off clear and sunny, was now filled with dark clouds, the kind that come before a storm. I gave the gates a slight push, and they creaked open on their own. I walked into the graveyard, knowing I had at least an hour before my parents would expect me home. Most of the graves were so old and weathered that the names and dates had worn away, but a few still had legible inscriptions, though nothing important. I wasn't alone. There were a few old women wandering around, probably widows or mothers mourning their children. Eventually, I found the grave she had been staring at. It was near the fence, and the shadows from the fence stretched over it, even though the sun wasn't shining anymore. I circled the grave, kicked at the dirt, and then sat down for a moment. I realized that I couldn't make out any of the details on the gravestone. It wasn't just covered in dirt. The name had been scratched off entirely. I sat there for a minute, desperately hoping something would become visible, but nothing did. So I just sat there, pulling my knees to my chest, staring at the grave. I started wondering if it had all been a weird dream, but I didn't remember waking up, and it felt too real. That's when I noticed something I missed before. Half buried in dirt and a tuft of grass, there was a small piece of paper. When I picked it up and dusted it off, I saw that it was yellowed and crinkled, like it had been there for a long time. The note read, "Help me, help 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 me. I've found you. Did you find me? Did you find me? Did you find me? Did you find me?" The words echoed in my head like a broken record, each repetition reverberating in my skull with increasing intensity. It started as a whisper, something I thought I could ignore, but now it was impossible to escape. I could feel it sinking into my skin, crawling through my veins, making me question every thought, every movement, every moment of silence. For a brief, sickening moment, I wondered if I had lost my mind. Was it some sort of joke? Was I being toyed with by someone who knew exactly how to push my buttons? But no, this wasn't playful. It was cold, detached, like something or someone was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. The air felt heavier, like the atmosphere had thickened around me. It wasn't just the weight of the words, but something else, something unexplainable that had latched onto me. My fingers curled tighter around the note I'd found, but it wasn't helping. As I read the words again, "I've found you," I could feel the paper start to crumble in my hands, almost like it was decaying before my eyes. The edges of the paper disintegrated, slipping away like sand through my fingers, until there was nothing left but fine particles floating in the air. The wind picked up, swirling them away. A shiver ran down my spine, and I froze in place. I had no idea why I was so terrified, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Something had changed. The world around me, the air I breathed, the very ground beneath my feet, it all felt different, altered somehow. "I've found you." I whirled around, half expecting to see someone standing behind me. But there was no one. Just empty space. The school, though familiar, seemed distant, like I was seeing it for the first time. The buildings looked smaller, the parking lot emptier, and the familiar sounds of students chattering had faded into an eerie silence. I took slow steps, almost involuntary, my body moving on its own as though some unseen force had taken over. Each step felt heavier than the last, like my feet were sinking into the concrete, dragging me down. The parking lot was almost deserted now, a few cars here and there, but it felt wrong. It was too quiet. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I could hear my brother's car approaching, the familiar rumble of the engine, but it didn't sound right either. The sound of the tires on the pavement was too loud, too sharp. As his car came into view, I saw his gray Civic rolling toward me, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of relief. I wasn't alone, but then he parked and sat there, staring at me through the windshield. We exchanged a glance, but it wasn't the usual brotherly exchange. It was full of confusion, a shared unease. He didn't speak at first, but I could see the concern in his eyes. It was the same concern that had been there for the past few days, ever since I'd started feeling like something was off, like I wasn't alone in my own skin. "Rough day?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as though he, too, was afraid of breaking the fragile silence between us. But his words felt empty, like they weren't meant to be heard. They were just something to fill the space. "Yeah," I muttered, my eyes darting toward the school again, then to the ground. I didn't want to tell him what was really going on inside my head. I didn't have the words for it. How could I explain that I felt hunted, like I was being watched every second? I couldn't even explain it to myself. We drove home in silence, the car feeling claustrophobic as the minutes stretched on. The usual banter between us wasn't there. It was as though we were both trapped in our own worlds, neither one of us daring to voice the fears that lingered in the back of our minds. I wanted to break the silence, to say something to make everything feel normal again. but the words wouldn't come. They caught in my throat, too heavy to speak. When we got home, I was greeted by the usual chaos of the house. My dog running circles around me, her nails tapping against the hardwood floors, her eager face bright with excitement. She was oblivious to the storm raging inside me. The cats, as usual, couldn't care less, slinking by with their indifferent gazes. But even their presence, normally comforting, felt like a distant echo, a reminder that everything was slipping out of my grasp. I didn't go upstairs right away. I stood there for a moment, just staring at the front door, trying to steady my breathing. It was as though the air around me was pressing in, suffocating me. I needed to be alone, to think, to figure out what was going on inside my head. But when I finally made my way upstairs, it felt like I was walking in a fog. My body was moving without my permission, sluggish and heavy. My room, once a place of safety, now felt like a prison. I collapsed onto my bed, face down, without bothering to change out of my clothes. I could still feel the weight of the day on me, but it wasn't physical exhaustion. It was something deeper, something in my chest that felt like it was closing in. I couldn't explain it, but it was there, pressing down on me from all sides. The room spun slightly when I closed my eyes. I wasn't sure if I was dizzy from exhaustion or if something else was at play. There was no comfort in the darkness. It was too thick, too consuming. I could hear the faint sound of the fan whirring in the background, but it didn't calm me. Nothing calmed me. I just lay there, counting the seconds as they dragged on, unable to escape the sensation that I wasn't alone, that something was watching me, waiting for me to slip up. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep, but it wasn't peaceful. The moment my eyes shut, I was bombarded by nightmares, twisted images of the woman. The same woman I'd seen in my waking moments. Her pale, lifeless face, her eyes hollow and dark, staring at me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. She was always there, always just out of reach, her lips moving as she whispered that same phrase over and over again. "I've found you." I woke up with a start, gasping for air, my heart racing. Sweat drenched my clothes, my body trembling with the remnants of the dream. I tried to sit up, but the room was spinning. Everything felt unreal. My reflection in the mirror was distorted, as though it didn't belong to me. I looked like a stranger. The sound of my own breathing was deafening in the silence. I stumbled to the bathroom, half blinded by the fog of confusion in my mind. I barely made it to the sink before the nausea hit. My stomach twisted, and I bent over, barely able to hold it back. The contents of my stomach surged up, but when I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw her again. The woman, standing in the doorway of the bathroom, her figure hazy, almost translucent. She wasn't real, she couldn't be. But there she was, just behind me, her eyes locked onto mine, unblinking. Her lips curled into a smile that made my skin crawl. Before I could react, the scream tore from her lips, sharp, guttural, full of pain and fury. It was so loud, so piercing, that I stumbled backward, falling into the wall, my hands scrambling for anything to steady myself. The world tilted, and everything went black. When I woke up again, I was back in my bed. The room was quiet, the sunlight streaming in through the window. But it didn't feel real. It was as though I had been transported to some other place, a place where the rules of time and space no longer applied. I couldn't explain it. The woman's face still lingered in my mind, her scream echoing in my ears. I checked the time on my phone. An hour had passed, but when I looked at the date, something was off. It wasn't right. Everything felt out of sync. The world had shifted, and I was no longer part of it. The fever set in soon after. It wasn't just the physical heat of it. It was the overwhelming sensation of being consumed from the inside out. My body felt like it was burning, my skin flushed with a fever I couldn't shake. I stumbled through the house, my legs weak, my mind foggy. I couldn't focus on anything. I tried to eat, but even the thought of food made me gag. My stomach felt empty, hollow. When I tried to sleep again, I was pulled into a nightmarish realm that I couldn't escape. The woman was always there, her whispers louder, more insistent. "I've found you." I woke up again, but this time, the knock came. It wasn't just on the door. It was inside me. The sound echoed, growing louder with each passing moment. I couldn't escape it. No matter where I went, it was always there. And the whispers? They never stopped. "I've found you." The woman finally came over to me. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, her presence hanging in the air like an oppressive fog, heavy and suffocating. Her eyes were locked on mine, unblinking, unwavering, and it felt like she could see into every part of me, the darkest corners of my soul, the things I'd buried deep inside. She reached out slowly, almost deliberately, and handed me a pad of paper. The texture of it felt odd under my fingers, like the pages were too smooth, too unnatural. Then she pressed the tip of a pencil against my chest, so forcefully that it hurt, like she was marking me, claiming me in some way. Without speaking, she simply whispered the command, "Write." I stared at her for a long time, confused, desperate to understand, but I couldn't find the words to ask her what she wanted me to write. So I did ask. "Write what?" The question barely left my lips before she vanished, disappearing into thin air, just like the whisper she left behind. But she didn't leave empty-handed. No, she left me with the paper and the pencil. They felt so heavy, almost as though they were full of something I couldn't understand, something pressing against my skin, demanding to be used. The eerie weight of it all lingered as I collapsed onto the bed and drifted into sleep once more. When I woke up, my phone flashed the time, 10:54 p.m., December 5th. Today, the air felt thick, almost oppressive, and my body didn't feel like my own. It was like the world around me had been swallowed by a void, and I was drifting in the middle of it. Then, as I lay there trying to make sense of everything, I saw it. The door to my room creaked open. The same woman, no thing, stood there in the doorway, her eyes fixed on me with that chilling intensity. She raised her hand and beckoned for me to follow her, as if I had no choice in the matter. But it was more than that. It was as if I wasn't in control of my body anymore. My legs moved, my feet shuffled across the floor, but I wasn't telling them to. It was as though I was being controlled by something far more powerful than I could comprehend. I tried to fight it, tried to tell my legs to stop, but they didn't listen. I think if I had tried on my own, I would have stumbled, fallen, unable to keep myself upright. But it didn't matter. I was being pulled, and I could do nothing but follow. She led me down the hallway, through the darkness of my own home. The kitchen seemed different, darker. The wood of the table I sat at was much darker than I remembered, almost unnaturally so. It was as if the house itself was warping, changing, bending around me. She sat me down at the table without a word, the silence between us thick with something I couldn't name. Then, again, that command, "Write." And so I did. I picked up the pencil she had given me, the tip almost too sharp, as if it was meant to cut me. My hand moved, almost of its own accord, scratching out words I couldn't quite understand, a language I didn't recognize, but my body kept writing. It wasn't my hand, but it was my mind. I couldn't stop, couldn't control it. The words flowed from the pencil, as though they were coming from somewhere far beyond me. I wrote for hours, or maybe longer. Time lost all meaning. My thoughts, my body, they were no longer mine, and still I wrote. And she watched. That same woman, no longer just a woman, but something else, something ancient and wrong, watched me as I scribbled on the paper. Her figure seemed to flicker, as if she was constantly shifting between two states. At times, she seemed almost ethereal, but then, when I looked closer, she seemed older. Her skin became dry, stretched tight against her bones, and her hair looked brittle, like it could snap at any moment. It was unsettling, terrifying even. And when I looked away, just for a second, she would return to how she was before, unchanged, eternal, like a shadow that could not be chased away. I could feel her presence behind me, always watching. Even when I closed my eyes for just a moment, I could sense her there just out of sight. And the knocking, that horrible, relentless knocking, began again. The walls themselves trembled under its intensity, shaking with each deafening thud. I could feel it in my bones, deep in my chest, vibrating through every inch of me. I wanted to scream, to make it stop, but my voice wouldn't come. My breath came in short, shallow gasps as I tried to stay grounded, but it was impossible. The world felt like it was closing in on me, suffocating me from all sides. The walls, once sturdy and solid, now dripped with crimson, thick, dark blood that pooled around my feet. The very air itself seemed tainted, blackened with something I couldn't name. It was as though the world outside was folding in on itself, becoming more alien with every passing second. The sky was a deep, endless void of black, and I could barely see beyond the window. The world felt suffocating, like everything was shrinking, pressing in on me, trying to swallow me whole. The nausea rose up again, heavy and thick, like a fever that wouldn't break. It was a sickness that gripped my chest, twisted my stomach, made everything feel wrong. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. The spiders returned, crawling across the walls, across the table, their tiny legs prickling against my skin. I could feel their presence even when I wasn't looking at them. Every movement, every shift in the corner of my vision was them. The knocking never stopped. It was constant, unyielding, echoing through my skull, through every fiber of my being. And then, as if I hadn't suffered enough, the woman returned. She was standing by the stairs now, holding a rope in her hands, and she beckoned me once more. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a plea. It was a command, and I couldn't resist. I couldn't fight it. Something deep inside me cracked, and I knew I was beyond saving. I set the note down on the table, the paper now filled with words I couldn't recall writing. It didn't matter. I couldn't fight this anymore. I had no strength left, no will. I couldn't take the torment any longer. The rope hung there, waiting. I felt myself stand up, moving as if on autopilot, as if I were just a spectator in my own body. I followed her down the hallway, to the stairs, where everything seemed to disappear into darkness. And then the thoughts started again. The words, the whispers. The same plea that had echoed in my mind for hours, days, maybe longer. Help me, help me, help me. Over and over again, each repetition more frantic, more desperate. I couldn't escape it. There was no escape. The woman's eyes followed me, unblinking, knowing, and I knew then that I was never meant to escape. Did you find me? Did you find me? Did you find me? Did you find me? Please, brother. The following writing was found in a suicide note, written by Lilith. Her parents are still in denial about her death. Her brother, am not. I'm the one who found her note, and I fear, with every passing day, that I may end up the same.